um, during the meditation, I found myself thinking, like you do, and I just realized it's 30 years to the month since I moved to the UK from New Zealand. And in most of those 30 years, I've been working in one sort of Buddhist right livelihood venture or other. I mean, when I lived in Mexico about 20 years ago for about 5 years, I did teach English, but I was also doing quite a lot of stuff at the Buddhist Center there and receiving some support for that. So that was kind of right livelihood as well. Yeah, so I've had a certain amount of experience in different kinds of Buddhist businesses and other ventures. I lived in a retreat center in North Wales for 3 years. So that was the right livelihood as well, but not a business. Yeah. So I was just sort of thinking, so it's quite a good opportunity tonight to, to be with you and talk about some of my experience and along with the team. And it gave me a chance to sort of ask myself questions like, well, what kind of world do I want to live in? And what kind of working world in particular in this context do I want to work in? After all, we spend maybe a quarter of our lives, adult lives, in work, which is a lot of time, some more, some less than that, but it's a big chunk of our lives. So it's something we want to find satisfying and meaningful and worthwhile. So I realized, well, for me, there's just a few things I thought of to start with. One is that it, as an order member, a member of the tree, like the Buddhist order, I definitely need to have good conditions for my Dharma practice. That is, the work needs to provide me with certain conditions outside of work, time for meditation, study, retreats, and friendship, and all those sorts of things. But also the work itself needs to be a context in which I can practice the Dharma, be mindful and kind and aware and so on, and those kinds of things. And to work on my mind in the context of work. And also the work needs to be ethical, positively ethical, or at the very least, ethically neutral. I'll come on to that a little bit later. Yeah. The second thing I thought was I want to work with friends very much. That's just for the sheer pleasure of it, if nothing else. Yeah, it's just very, very heartening and pleasurable to be working with friends. I don't want to work with people I don't get on with, or people who are on a completely different wavelength if I can avoid it. Sometimes that's necessary, and that's okay. But ideally, I'd like to be working with friends. And then the third thing I thought of was that I want to be contributing to the world in some way, contributing to the well-being of the world, to alleviation of suffering, and that kind of thing. And also promoting Buddhist values in the world. And so if I'm working in a Buddhist business, for example, the business itself might be fairly kind of neutral in terms of its product, but it may, make quite a lot of money or some money to give to charities and Buddhist projects and so on to further to improve the world in that way. So those were some of the things I thought of. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we call in the movement team-based right livelihood businesses, and just kind of look at the principles of those kinds of working situations that we promote in the movement. So I'm going to look at it through just looking at those selection of words: team-based right livelihood business, and just kind of have a look at each of those words and just see what it tells us about what we're doing. So the first one is that we're a team-based business. So New View Residential, that I work for, along with 7 friends, colleagues, good friends, is a team-based business. And there are many kinds of teams in the world and in teams in businesses, but because we're a Buddhist business, what team-based means for me is that we're a spiritual community working together at work, that we're friends together, and that's really, really important. As friends, we try to maintain as much as possible, very successfully, I should say, goodwill and harmony and kindness and awareness of each other, supporting each other in our work, being aware of what we need and so on, and very much cooperating together in the work situation. So yes, we're a spiritual community at work. And yeah, so I just find that very, very satisfying indeed. Incidentally, it's also, I think, working in a team which is really harmonious and people are getting on together very well and cooperating very well, happens also to be good for business, I think. One of the teams I worked in, one of the Buddhist businesses I worked in, was a big vegetarian restaurant in Croydon in South London called Hockney's. And I worked in a team of about 10 of us, I think, 10 to 12. And there were days when it was very harmonious and goodwill and so on, and people were in good mood and so on. And on those days, the work just flowed so much better. We were more effective, more efficient, made fewer mistakes and so on. But there were also days, sad to say, when there were frictions and tensions and ill will and frustrations and so on between some of the members of the team. And on those days, the work was just uphill all the way. And we made mistakes and it was slow and all those sorts of things. So I think harmony and goodwill and cooperation is also good for business, incidentally, as it happens. Yeah. So that's the first thing. Is we're a team-based business, which means we're a spiritual community working together as friends, basically. The second word is right. So what right means to me here is that we're an ethical business. So right equals ethical for me. So we're ethical in terms of our relationships with each other. We try to be very aware and kind and work in harmony and so on with each other in the team. Also with our relations with the people we deal with. For example, our clients are our landlords. So we, our relationships with them need to be and are very ethical. So the way we relate to our landlords. Also, the tenants are very, very important, obviously, in a letting agency. So with tenants, also with contractors, with suppliers, anyone we deal with basically in the business, our relationships with them are as ethical as we can make them. And yeah. So we try to be honest and truthful and transparent in our dealings with anyone, and also kind and aware. So although our relationships are formal in a sense with those people, there's also a kind of relaxed, easy manner with many of them as well. And some of them we have relationships which go back many, many years, and which is also very, very satisfying, I find. Yeah. We're also ethical in the sense that we try to be as kind and to the environment as possible, and minimize any sort of harm that we may cause to the environment. For example, in my case, one of the jobs I do is to dispose of waste from the business, and of which there can be quite a lot at times, I can assure you. And so I try to stream the waste into different recycling kind of streams, like metal or electrical items or gardening waste, and try to minimize what I throw in the landfill. Yeah, so that's just an example, as you might expect, perhaps, of trying to be as ethical as possible. And we also, where we can, try to actually enhance the environment. At the moment, we're engaged in a project of getting solar panels or more of them on the properties that belong to the Windhorse Trust, to reduce the amount of electricity that is needed to be generated out there, as it were. So there's probably a lot one could say about right or being ethical, but it's a very important aspect of the business. Then thirdly, it's a team-based right livelihood business. So it may seem obvious, but it's worth stating or making the point that we are a livelihood, which means that we meet the material needs of the people working in the business. You could see business as a kind of subset of livelihood, because there's many livelihoods which are not a business. For example, people who work here at the Buddhist Center, they're very much working a livelihood. They're getting their material needs met and they're contributing a lot, but it's not a business, it's a charity. So a livelihood need not be a business. Yeah, but it does need to meet the material needs of the people working there. For me, another example from Hockney's restaurant where I worked there for about 3.5 years, and I managed the team, the restaurant for 2 years. Back in the 1980s, it was a very successful restaurant financially, and such that it bought Rivendell Retreat Centre in Sussex, and also it bought a big house in South Clapham in London. So it's very, very successful in the 80s, but by the time I got there in the early 90s, it was way past its heyday, and we were really struggling to make a profit, such that some of the people in the team actually had to be on housing benefit because the business couldn't pay enough to cover their wages. Such was the financial situation. So for me, in this context, you could say it was not fully a livelihood in that sense, because it didn't earn enough money, really. So livelihood is the third aspect of what we do. So we're a team-based, right, livelihood, and then we're also a business. So a business is a bit different from a charity. So New View Residential is a business, which means it's set up or designed to make a profit or a surplus. That's the purpose of the business. In the vast majority of businesses anyway. And in our case, we make a profit, a surplus, to give away to other charities and to Buddhist projects. In our case, the way it works is that we divide the profits into two halves, the surplus, and the landlords, our clients, can choose from a range of about half a dozen charities where they give half of the profit. So they can choose where half of the profit goes to one or more of about 6 charities. And the other half of the profit goes to the Windhorse Trust, which is the Windhorse Trust actually owns the business. And then the Windhorse Trust distributes that money according to need in the movement. So there's many projects in the movement that have benefited and are benefiting from the money that the Windhorse Trust allocates. And of course, as a business, we have to work very much within the professional framework of a letting agency, according to the laws of the land and the guidelines and recommendations and laws of this kind of business. So we're very much a kind of a professional business as well. So those are just a few ideas about a kind of introduction to what is a team-based right livelihood business. And I think all those features are very much part of New View Residential. We've got a great team, which all of whom are here tonight, I'm delighted to say. We try to be as ethical as possible. We make money to support ourselves, and we work as a business, so along business lines very much. Okay, so that's what I've got to say about that. So now, as Kulapriya mentioned, I'm just going to have a little chat with each of the members of the team. He called it an interview, but it's not really an interview. Just I'm just curious to know what they think about certain things, about what we do. So first of all, I'm going to say hello to Johanna. Hi there, nice to see you. Yeah. So Johanna, you lived in you come from Ireland and you've been in the business for about 2 years. And I know something that very dear to your heart is the whole area of community and working as a spiritual community together. And so I wonder what you think about the theme of this whole series about community in a divided world, and how you see that. So just wondering what you see, how we contribute to community in a divided world.
Yeah. Thanks, Sangha Night. Okay. So I do definitely see us, the team, New View, as a community. And when I was reflecting on the theme, community in a divided world, I suppose what came up for me was divided self, divided world, divided self. Be the change you want to see in the world. So divided self then, brings up integration for me. And integration being, one of the 5 stages of the system of practice that Sangha Rakshita, taught, devised, that we practice in Triratna. So this kind of got me thinking a bit about, I suppose, why I came to Cambridge. I was working in Dublin, a few years ago, and in the GFR process, and I was working for various organisations. So I had a lot of wheels spinning, basically. And I come over to the UK, go on retreat. And then when I go back to Dublin, I'd have to nearly park what I was doing, the process I was exploring on retreat, until almost nearly until I came back on retreat again. Because basically my work conditions weren't conducive to me kind of deepening into the practice. So I was on the Mythic Context retreat in Tiratnaloka a few years ago, and I had, about day 7 or 8 into that, I realised, this is the way I want to go. This practice is what I want to explore more of. There was a deep knowing of that. I knew I needed to change my work conditions. So I basically applied to New View, and a few months later it was. So I suppose I addressed, an aspect of fragmentation in my life. There was a sense of fragmentation, particularly in my work life. So then kind of coming to New View, what has happened, I suppose, for me in relation to, say, divided self or unintegrated self, I see myself very much working on those parts of myself. And definitely my cultural conditioning, I came up against my cultural conditioning when I moved to England. I became aware I was quite nationalist, which I wasn't aware of when I was in Ireland. And also psychological conditioning and integration, psychological integration. So definitely there's a lot of psychological integration going on for me. I'm very much up close and personal to my team, my colleagues, and emotional, mental states of mind very much, are up close and personal as well. So I'm working a lot on integrating on a kind of psychological, integrative way. So yeah, so it's hugely supportive. We do in our team meetings bring in those aspects of ourselves. We're looking at what we're working on. We're sharing, we're discussing, exploring what we're working on. Not every week, but every few weeks we have our team-based right livelihood meeting where it is very much checking in with how we are as individuals. So basically, for me, we are a community, and we're working, to address the divided aspect of ourselves in order to, I suppose, be able to kind of go out into the world and be, somewhat integrated and helpful out there. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that, Sam and Matty.
Thanks. That's really interesting, Johanna. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Now, Martin, I know you're a man of much experience in the world, And although you've also worked at Windhorse Trading a few years back until it closed. Yeah, so I'm just wondering how you would compare your experience of working in the world. You're working in social services, I believe, and a teacher for a bit as well. So I'm just wondering how that compares with your experience of working in team-based right livelihood businesses, New View, and also Windhorse Trading before, if that's relevant to, yeah.
Thank you, Sangha Night. Hello, Cambridge. Yes, hello. I spent most of my working career working in providing social work services for children, child protection social work services in a variety of local authorities. Before coming into the context of working in a team-based right livelihood, and as Sangha Night says, this is my second team-based right livelihood. The first was Windhorse Trading, where I was lucky enough to spend 2 years before the business closed. And I think on both occasions, coming into team-based right livelihood, I felt a sense of sort of liberation and happiness in my work context, which I didn't experience working in a local authority. And I guess, intention is critical to our outcome, what our intention is when we go into an enterprise. So I thought I'd start by looking at, what's the difference between the intentions I had working in a local authority and my intention and motivation for working in team-based right livelihood. Working in local authorities in child protection teams, I was very committed to protecting the vulnerable, trying to use the resources available to help and support families. But I also had a number of other competing agendas that were an inherent part of working for a local authority and working in the context where ambition, career, financial reward were key elements for a lot of people around me, and I was also engaged with that. And there was also a bit of a gulf between the rhetoric and the reality of the job. So certainly in the latter stages of my involvement in social work, I was a manager and I was trying to square a lack of resources with protecting the local authority from criticism, and also trying to protect the workers that I was managing who were having to work more than they needed to. And that left me with a consistent low-level anxiety, outside my working life. Working in a team-based right livelihood, I don't have any of that anxiety. Sometimes things get a bit tricky, but I'm not lying awake at night thinking about it. And my intention is not, hasn't got that personal element in it. So my intention in working in right livelihood is to take forward, as Sangha Night said, the key features of the business, which is to develop a working community, a team-based working community, to generate some financial support for organisations outside of our business, but also to exemplify Buddhist principles within a business context. So to show that it works, to do it as part of work as well as part of spiritual practice, and to test out what it feels like to be working to a different set of values in a very competitive and business orientated environment. So all of that I found very liberating, and I would echo what Johanna says about that being a sense of integration in my experience as well. My work, my spiritual practice, my friendships are all based around the same value set and common themes. I think there's a sense of excitement also about being part of a radical alternative, because team-based right livelihood is a kind of a vanguard of the new society, if you like, and it's an opportunity to see how businesses could work and function in a different culture, with a different set of values. And it's been an opportunity for me to grow personally. So I think the aspect of friendship, trust, sharing our lives together, it's given me the opportunity to examine how I react to work, how I react to challenges at work, how I accept responsibility, because our team-based right livelihood is not a hierarchical organisation. So we all take personal responsibility, not just for our areas of work, but for whatever else we can offer. And there's no boss, so there's no one looking over your shoulder. So it's very much down to wanting to do the best for your own, for your friends, and to live up to your principles. So those are some themes, anyway, for me about working in team-based right livelihood that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. It's very rich experience there. Yeah. Okay, Gabby, I know. So, Martin, you've come from kind of a public service kind of social service background, and Gabby, you've come from the world of big business in a way. Yeah, and of course, in big business, it's very much the profit motive rules, doesn't it, in a way? So I'm wondering how you sit with that coming to right livelihood, whether it's been kind of a relief to let that behind, or whether you've kind of rescued the best aspects of, profit motive, or how you see it working in this business.
I think it's the latter. So thank you. Hi everybody. Thanks for having us. So I used to work in the world and for businesses that I suppose could have been accused of putting profit before people. And in certain circles, profit has almost become a bit of a dirty word. And personally, I don't think it has to be. It's just about the how, I suppose. But I joined New View Residential 2 years ago for very similar reasons that everybody else has outlined. My professional life and my aspiration in terms of how I actually wanted to live my life, they just didn't fit anymore. And I was in a Buddhist study group, which is what we do for those of you who are not very familiar with Triratna, which is the movement that we practice in. So team-based right livelihood is one of the cornerstones, and we were studying the models of team-based right livelihood and the ideas that our founder Sangha had. And they were very much influenced by 1960s ideas of new models, and there was talk about people only working part-time and dedicating the rest of their lives to their practice. And and I thought that sounded absolutely bonkers, to be perfectly honest with you. And it just wasn't realistic. And if everybody would do and would work like that, what would the world come to? And as I got to know more and more businesses, Buddhist businesses, as I got more involved, I did see that the ones that had a strong focus on the proper bottom line, on profits, could do an awful lot of good. And that was something that I wanted to do. And for me, profits for the people rather than putting profits before people is what we're trying to do. And one of the best examples that it was already talked about, and I think Stephen will talk a bit more about that as well. We're on Zoom now, but hopefully one day we can go back to our Buddhist center here in Cambridge, and that was bought by the profits of Windhorse trading, what we talked about. Some of us here who live in communities and in some of the houses along Newmarket Road, they were bought with the profits from Windhorse trading. So it's not about that profit is a dirty word. It's the how you arrive at it. And for me, in terms of the practice, it's the ethical framework of what's called the 5 precepts, where we're all trying to practice kindness, generosity, stillness, truthfulness, and mindfulness. And to have a collective practice of, when we're not working from home, when we collectively recite these 5 precepts in the morning, that actually really sets you up for the day in terms of how we deal with each other, how we deal with, contractors, landlords, tenants, and everybody else we come into contact with. Now, it's an aspiration. It doesn't always work. I sometimes still get grumpy, but it's a very, very different way of working. And that means, you know, because we're profitable, we can give money away, you know, as we've already mentioned. So last year we gave money to the NHS Charities Together, to the Trussell Trust, to Karuna, to the Arthur Rank Hospice Charity, the Wildlife Trust, Ormiston's Families, and Blue Cross. So basically, you know, we can make a profit and we can make a difference. I could say a lot more, but I have run out of time. And please ask us loads of questions if there's anything else you'd like to know. Thank you. Back to you, Sangha Night.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Yeah, really good to hear about that side of it, because it's quite easy to overlook the fact that we are a business and we make money to give away, you know. And as you say, I didn't mention Windhorse Trading, but it made a huge amount of money back in the 90s. And it's done a huge amount of good for the, you know, for the movement and the world. Yeah. So thanks for highlighting, bringing that up. Yeah. Prasanna Vera, you're a key person in the business in terms of holding all the financial side of things together, which is absolutely crucial, of course. But you're also very much involved in the Windhorse Trust, and so you've got an eye out to the world that the trust lends money and gives money to very much. Just wonder if you can expand on that and just see, kind of look at a bit beyond New View Residential, which is still quite a small business, hopefully growing. But yeah, just say a bit about all that, what the trust does and that.
Sure. Yeah. Hi everybody. Yes, I'm Prasanna Vera. Some of you may not have seen me before, but very, very good to see you guys. And yeah, so I am going to talk about what Sangha Night prompted me to, but I did just want to say something that I've been involved with team-based livelihood for nearly 30 years now, and I keep doing it. And I did have a life before that. It seems like a long time ago now. And I've worked for the NHS, I worked in the City of London, I was an academic for a while, even worked in factories. And team-based livelihood or team-based livelihood businesses, to be more precise, is where I feel that my aspirations are met. And I want to pour my energies into that if I can. So people have mentioned Windhorse Trading, Windhorse Trust, obviously New View Residential. New View Residential is a lettings agency, and as such, what we do is we manage properties. So we look after tenancies, we look after the maintenance side of properties, and New View Residential does that for the Windhorse Trust. So although Windhorse Trust owns New View Residential, actually the New View Residential really helps the Windhorse Trust as well. And as Gabby and Sangha Night were saying, the Windhorse Trading was also owned by the Windhorse Trust and made lots of money in the 1990s. And with some of that money, bought property in Cambridge and other places. And most of not all, but most of the income of the Windhorse Trust comes from that rental income. So the New View Residential plays a critical role in the function of the Windhorse Trust. So I think one of the aspects of that that's relevant to the theme that we have for this session is that through the Windhorse Trust, again, as Sangha Night was saying, New View Residential is connected to the wider Sri Ratna Buddhist community. So there are some sort of key ways that we contribute to that. So we might give out dana or donations to help individual Buddhists to practice. So for example, if somebody for some reason perhaps can't afford to go on retreat, it may be that we may help them to do that. We give money to different centres as donations to help them in their activities. So what do we do? So there's Mexico, there's the European Chairs Assembly. So the Chairs Assemblies are where the chair people of the different centres get together and work out how to run their centres. We give money to India, Dharma Chakra, Future Dharma Fund. The Future Dharma Fund is kind of a portal that we use. So we're the biggest donor to the Future Dharma Fund, and the Future Dharma Fund decide where that money goes across Sri Ratna. We give loans, so we've got typically maybe around 1 million or a bit more loans out at any one time. Spain, Berlin, Helsinki, Scotland, Sheffield, Southampton, Paris, Brighton, the LBC, Colchester. Maybe over the years that I've been involved, it's maybe been 30 different loans that we've had active at any one time, well, not any one time, but across that time. Donations, in the year 2019-20, we gave out nearly £100,000 in donations. So it's quite substantial. In fact, last year we gave out 136,000. So it's quite substantial what's going on. And a lot of that is as a result of the legacy from Windhorse Trading. But we couldn't do it in a way without New View Residential. That plays a critical role in the whole process. There's obviously lots more I could say, but I've run out of time as well. So I'm going to finish there.
Thanks very much, Prasanna. Very good to hear the relationship between the trust and New View, and how New View supports the trust by managing its properties. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Stephen, I know you're a man of very wide interests and fingers in different pies here and there. And for example, I know you're involved in a Buddhist project in Uganda, for example, and more recently, as well in the new retreat centre in Alfoxden down in Somerset. And I know you're very, very deeply concerned about environmental issues. So just wonder if you'd say a little bit about how you think New View connects with kind of, these broader issues beyond Triratna even, what you might think about that.
Yeah, thanks, Matty, and yeah, very good to be here. Yeah, I'm the newest member of New View. Actually, I've been with New View for just over a year after sort of 35 odd years as a practicing architect, and like many people have mentioned, I was seeking a life where my kind of work and spiritual practice and really all aspects of my life felt more integrated, and I certainly found that in New View. It's just been a wonderful experience for me to join this team. But I think one thing that to follow your question, Sangha Matty, really, I mean, it's very important to me is that we, and people have already alluded to this, we don't sort of remain as a kind of self-contained bubble business in Cambridge, but we, as far as we can, we kind of reach out to the wider Triratna community, and people have already mentioned a number of ways in which that happens, and more broadly into the world. I mean, the theme of this series is community in a divided world, and I think we are a small community, but we want to do what we can to assist, help, and influence wherever we can, really. So, people have talked about the fact that we generate profit, and that can be used in very beneficial ways. We also have the opportunity, I think, of giving our time, because obviously the way the business is set up, the way New View is set up, I mean, if we decide a project is worth supporting, we can either give money towards it, or we could actually allocate some of our time. And within this team, we have a very, broad range of skills and experience in a whole range of property-related areas. So sort of finance, property management, in my case, sort of design and planning, and environmental aspects. And these are all things we can kind of offer support and advice to various projects within Triratna and beyond. So, a couple of examples that I've got involved with. So, Matty, you mentioned the Alfoxden project. That's it's a small country house down in Somerset, which a group of Buddhists have bought, and it's going to be converted into a retreat centre for the arts and for Buddhism. It's very significant in the arts history because in literary history, because Coleridge and Wordsworth both lived there for a year. And I've been able to offer some support in terms of the advice on the conservation of the building and the grounds. So just one example. And here in Cambridge, there's a group of Buddhists who are we've started a co-housing project called Suvana. And I've just recently got a bit involved in that to see if I can help with some of the sort of planning and site acquisition aspects of that. So I think there's a number of ways in which we can, we can use, the values and the resources and the skills that we have, and sort of take those out into the wider world. And I think for me, you mentioned the environmental aspects. That's very important, and that's our kind of global responsibility, really. Somebody earlier mentioned we're doing a scheme of solar panels and other environmental sustainability upgrades to the Windhorse properties, and we hope that the skills we kind of generate from that and the expertise we generate, we can then offer to our other landlords. So we hopefully spread that message more widely. So that's just kind of some examples, I think, of how how we can sort of take what we do at New View and the values that we try to model sort of out into the wider world. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah. So finally to Kulapriya. So Kulapriya, you used to be a high-powered scientist, but these days you work for New View Residential, and I'm kind of curious. When you step out your door from Cypress Towers near, I know you've just moved recently, but and stride down Mill Road on the way to Cobble Yard to New View office, what gives you a sort of spring in your stride, and what do you particularly look forward to about arriving in the office and getting on with the day's work?
Saying good morning to you, Samamati.
Well, you have the award for the best morning greeting from Windhorse Trading, you remember?
It's a very good question. And it's kind of quite a deep question. It's basically a question about, motivation, perspective, view on life. There's a lot in there. So as you say, yes, I was trained as a scientist, and I did work as a scientist for 20 odd years in academia and in pharmaceuticals, and more latterly in sort of business development for smaller biotech companies, which is why I ended up in Cambridge from my native Scotland. I think, though, during all of those years, and I guess a lot of people will probably resonate with this, is that when you are in these sorts of environments, there's just something slightly jars. Now, the reason I became a scientist was because I wanted to help, basically. I had this kind of deeper aspiration towards helping. So I wanted to, be involved in biological research to discover cures for things. I mean, in a way, you could see that as being highly naive, and in a way it is, but it was one of the deeper currents in me. There was this desire to, in some way, be helpful. But when you're actually in those environments day in, day out, as Gabby was alluding to, there's a slight sort of change of emphasis. And whilst, they are very helpful, we're all very grateful to AstraZeneca and to Pfizer-BioNTech and all the other vaccine producers at the moment. Not many of us, had the luck and the privilege to be working on, such topical and necessary projects. So, for example, when I worked in a pharmaceutical company, we had a range of projects, most of which got cut, so that we could focus on finding medication for obesity. Now, whilst that, is a great source of suffering for many people, it wasn't really kind of what would have got me out of bed in the morning. What would have got me out of bed would have been something like the COVID vaccine research, or something if that had been relevant at the time. So there was something about a jar. There was a jar in my life between what I was doing and it being slightly askew from my deeper aspiration. So some 20, 15-ish, whatever, years ago, I had the chance to move to Right Livelihood. So the deeper current of wanting to be helpful was still there, but I was being helpful, as it were, in a different way. I was being helpful in a way, as Johanna alluded to earlier, in becoming more of an integrated person in myself, which would then allow me to be more helpful to others. So I think there was a kind of, as it's been mentioned by several, there was a sort of an aspect of integration around the aspiration of helpfulness, which was met more fully and more head-on, and in many ways in a much more challenging way through Right Livelihood and through Buddhist practice than it had been as a working, practicing scientist who went to a Buddhist centre in the evening, kind of thing. So there was a kind of schism. And I think as well, just to pick up on a couple of the themes that have been mentioned by others, there's always a great kind of motivation in me to be a bit of a fourth sight. So for those of you who are not familiar, there's this kind of metaphorical, in a way, idea of the Buddha went off in search of his quest after seeing 4 sights. So the 4 sights were old age, sickness and death, which led to a kind of question about what's the meaning of this human existence, if that's its content for everyone. But then the 4th sight was a wandering mendicant or monk, and that gave the Buddha the idea that the spiritual life, in a way, was the answer to this deep conundrum of what is the function of a human life. And I've always found that 4th sight incredibly motivating idea, just to keep in mind that I myself, through practice, could become a 4th sight to some other people. I might not know that I'm being a 4th sight. The wandering mendicant didn't know that he sent the Buddha off on his quest to become a Buddha. So I might not know about it, and there's something very beautifully poetic about that. But also where I work, New View, could become a bit of a 4th sight, as you were mentioning, Samamati, about being in and of the world and, you know, adhering to all the rules and trying to make a profit, but doing it in a different way. And that, to sort of borrow some words from the puja, can sort of perfume things around us. So I think a kind of personal aspiration or aim of being of help in some ways, and also through practice, being a 4th sight. I think that's what has me skipping along Mill Road.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gurupriya. Yeah. Oh, thanks to all of you. Yeah, it's really good to hear from you. And yeah, so yeah, wonderful. Just Gabby, I'm wondering if there are any questions there. Yeah.
There are. Thank you very much, everybody. Gosh, there's quite a bit of interest. It's we didn't know how much whether you would find this interesting enough, but there's one from Lucy. Lucy was very taken with Martin's experience working in the NHS herself, and she was asking, are there ways we can hold on to our own values and ethics even when the organization we work for does not share our values? Can I maybe hand that to Martin, because you've done both. You've gone from team-based right livelihood back into the NHS. So how did you hold on to your values and ethics, apart from then running back into team-based right livelihood? But
apart from leaving. Well, actually, the second time I went into team-based right livelihood, as I said, as a sort of way of kind of clearing my head, really, and kind of redefining what I wanted to do with my working life. But then Windhorse trading closed, and I needed to go back into a professional role in social work. And I felt that the second time I went back in, having had the experience of working in team-based right livelihood, I would go in with the explicit kind of intention of applying my Buddhist ethics and principles, but also of making myself known as a Buddhist within the context of the business. So I was lucky enough to go into a couple of local authorities where they gave me some scope to, for instance, run a lunchtime meditation session. And that gave me the opportunity to talk to people about my practice and how I interpreted, you know, both the agency's responsibilities and my personal responsibilities in the context of having a, you know, a conversation with people about meditation. So I think it was, for me, it felt the second time I was in a local authority, I was able to say, look, I'm a practicing Buddhist, and I'd like, you know, to hold me to account if you want, but you know, that's what I'm bringing to the job, and that's the flavour of my either management style or my involvement with the agency, and for me that was helpful. It also, you know, made me really practice. You know, I felt I had to walk the walk at that point. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks. Question from Jane. What is the reaction of contractors, etc., to the Buddhist values of the business? Do they find it strange? Samamati.
I think, you know, I think they just pick up on a really positive, warm vibe. You know, no doubt there are some things strange. It just reminds me actually that in the latter days, well, the last half a dozen years or more of Windhorse trading, we had quite a number of non-Buddhists working there, and they really enjoyed it on the whole, and I think what they really enjoyed was just the atmosphere and that we brought as a Buddhist culture to it. So I think we were bringing just universal human values. So I think that's what people pick up on, our contractors. It's nothing special. It's not sort of religious particularly, or you know what they pick up on. I don't think, or anything kind of esoteric. I think it's just sort of you know, decent, honest, universal human values that we're communicating in a way, and anybody can pick up on that. Yeah, so that's what I think they mostly get. So I don't think there's anything kind of, you know, peculiar particularly that we communicate. Yeah.
Tracy has a question. Are all employees Buddhists, and can non-Buddhists join? Could I maybe throw that out to Prasanna Vera?
Sure, yeah. Well, in theory, yes. It's quite a complex question, actually, or complex response. As Samamati was saying, then in principle, yes, and it's obviously depending on the individuals involved. There's no reason why it shouldn't work, as it were. I think one of the things that we, as a completely Buddhist business, as it currently is, there are certain aspects of employment law that we benefit from. So it means that we can focus our recruitment efforts on the Buddhist community rather than having to open it up wider. So it's not that we don't want to have non-Buddhists there, but it's more that if we want to focus, so for example, we do the Reference and Precepts each week at the beginning on Monday morning. Now, having a non-Buddhist there might change the dynamic, but it obviously depends on who that person is. So there are some subtleties and nuances there. Yeah, so it's an interesting question, I think, and it was certainly Windhorse trading. I wasn't at Windhorse trading that long actually, but my sense was that it did work. But there are some legal aspects and some in a way, it sort of depends very much on the nuances of the individuals involved. I think just Sangha is referring to the contractors. In a way, I sort of regard them as being part of our expanded team. Some of the contractors I've known for quite a long time, and we get on very well. Not just me and them, but generally we all get on well. And there's a sense of a community, a wider community, a network of people working together. They may not be Buddhist, they may not be employed by New Residential, but even so, there's a relationship there, and it's a very positive relationship on the whole.
Right, thank you. There's an interesting question from Polly that I am going to throw at Kulapriya. Polly is wondering how the business model at New View compares to that of a commercial agency, other than the way the profit is distributed. Are there any distinct differences?
Good question, very good question. I suppose there's a couple of levels of answer. So, as you may or may not know, the lettings business is fairly highly regulated, and quite rightly so. We are both there to ensure that our tenants are not in any way exploited or maltreated by landlords, and equally there to ensure that, you know, our landlords are fairly recompensed and whatever for the properties that they're providing. So we're a bit of a sandwich, as it were, between what could be seen as opposing views, but actually, you know, we have very good relationships with the vast majority of our tenants and the vast majority of our landlords. Occasionally we have issues, but on the whole, we get on quite well with everyone. But that's all within the context of a very stringent legal framework. So most of us that are here this evening are qualified to a certain degree, so we're recognised as being competent to do the jobs that we do. And that's all part of fitting within with that legal framework. And therefore, at that level, I would say we're probably no different from any other lettings agency. However, has been mentioned before, we don't really have a particular hierarchical structure. You know, we're just a group of friends, by and large, working together. Some of us have a bit more experience, and obviously that, you know, that can be helpful, and people can look to the more experienced people for help and guidance, and that's what we're there for. But there's no particular structure in a kind of classical business sense of, you know, directors of this and assistants so-and-sos and VPs of the next thing. We don't really have that, although, as I mentioned, we do have different degrees of experience. And that level, we are different. And also, I would say probably our main difference would just be our friendliness to our landlords and tenants as fellow human beings who are looking for somewhere to live. We all understand that, and we try and, you know, make that process of finding and moving into somewhere new to live as straightforward and painless and honest as possible. We try as best we can to be completely upfront with what the law of the land dictates we have to do. So we don't hide anything from anybody. It might not be the best news that they've heard all day, that, you know, they have to pay some money for a deposit or whatever. But we're quite honest about it. We don't hide anything from anybody. So I think in the way that we try to work, we're probably a bit different from most other agencies. But within a kind of UK legal framework, we do have to adhere to that as much as anybody else does.
Great, thank you. We have run out of time. There is a final question that I'm going to answer very, very quickly, and then I'm going to hand over to Arthur Siddy. There's a question from Alex about, is there anyone they could talk to about the possibility of setting up a right livelihood business? You could try and talk to the Windhorse Trust and see where that takes you. That would be my first bit of advice. But yeah,
I'd be very happy to talk to Alex, and I think
great.
Probably Kate Raja would be as well.
Great, thank you very much. And on that note, thank you everybody for your questions. I'm really sorry I didn't get, you asked so many brilliant questions and I didn't even get to half of them. Thanks a million. And I'm going to hand over to Arthur Siddy now.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much, Nuvu. So good to have you. We'll have to have you back. Obviously, too many questions to answer in one session. But we gave you the title of Making the Ideal Real, and I think you exemplify that so well, bringing your ideals into this area, very, very real areas of making money and livelihood. So thank you very, very much for coming and sharing what's quite radical, really, what's quite a radical project, sharing that with us. Right under our noses, just around the corner from the Buddhist Centre. Yeah, so we hope we'll have you back